Hi, this is Mr. Brewer, and you're listening and watching to Lesson 28 for my junior English course. We are having kind of a different sort of class today. Our writing lesson today is going to be short, our literature lesson is going to be a little bit longer, and our informational lesson will be a little bit longer too. Um, as we go through today, we do have only this week and next week remaining before we go to winter break on the 19th. So just kind of be aware of that as you're looking for work to make up or as you're working towards completing the second essay that's due on next Friday, the 19th. Again, that QR code in the bottom right hand corner, if you take a picture of the screen with your phone right now or scan the QR code, however, that will take you to the Uber document that contains all of the recorded lessons as well as all of the explanations for all of the assignments and all of the readings that we have done so far this year. So it's all there in that document if you're trying to find something specific to work on. All right, our graded work this week are Act 1, Scene 1 questions, which are due Saturday. That's tied to A Raisin in the Sun. We watched the first act in class on Thursday and Friday, and you can find a link to the film itself in Google Classroom under primary texts to watch that. Our other graded assignment this week is your peer review is due at the end of the week. That is just a Google form that says that you did have someone look at your rough draft. That person could have been me or a family member. That is due this weekend also. All right, let's look at our learning targets for the week. For writing, we're going to review the peer review form so that we know what that looks like and we know where to go to turn that in for Saturday. And for literature, we're going to review the events of Act 1, Scene 1 in A Raisin in the Sun, and discuss the questions in the assignment for Act 1, Scene 1 by talking about, what the meaning of the events was. And this means we can complete the questions after discussing the events of the scene. For our informational lesson today, we're going to read one passage from the informational text, The Color of Law, to discuss the context of A Raisin in the Sun, specifically the context in Louisville for The Raisin in the Sun. The text is about Chicago, but Louisville has a very specific history of segregation and racial violence that ties in pretty closely to the events of A Raisin in the Sun and the life of Lorraine Hansberry. All right, so let's take a look at our week structure. Mondays and Tuesdays, you'll have a recorded lesson like the one you're listening to right now. On Wednesdays, my office hours are posted in Google Classroom each Wednesday. You can drop in and get some assistance on any assignment that you're struggling with or get some direction on what to work on if you're trying to make up your grade. And the in-lesson is on Thursdays and Fridays, and that is a live and recorded lesson, and that recorded lesson is usually posted in the afternoon on Wednesdays or very early in the morning on Thursdays. All right, in my live class in mindfulness, we'll listen to a song or watch a short chill video, but here we're just going to keep on moving. All right, so let's review the peer review form that's due Saturday and just kind of look at what that is and how to complete that. It is a Google form, and before you complete it, you're going to need to either work with another student, a family member, a friend, or me to have someone look at your rough draft. You can record me as your peer reviewer, and that's fine. If you turn in your rough draft, you can use me. This is due Saturday, and there are 3 specific types of feedback that you're looking for and responding to in this form. There's grammar, there's understandability and flow, and there's positive and interesting aspects about the piece. So those are the 3 types of feedback. If you haven't showed your essay to someone yet and you're trying to figure out what to ask them to look at, you're going to ask them to look at your grammar. You're going to ask them to look at the flow. Does it make sense? And you're going to ask them to give you some positive feedback. So, don't just say, grade my grammar and then tell me what I need to fix. Say, what do you like about this essay? What is interesting? Because they should be giving you some positive feedback too. So if you haven't done your rough draft or your outline, do those first. For 2 reasons. The outline is worth 50 points, the rough draft is worth 50 points, and this assignment is worth 50 points. So that's 150 points tied up in doing your outline, your rough draft, and this peer review form. Your final draft is only worth 100 points, so you actually get more points doing this essay by completing your outline, rough draft, and this form than you do for the whole final draft. That's by design. What we're trying to do this year is become better writers through following the steps of the writing process. It's not just about producing a final draft and being happy with that. We really want to have each specific part of the writing process graded and represented in your gradebook. Just reiterating, those three things that you're going to have people look for when they're looking at your essay are grammar, like capitalization issues, spelling, mismatched words, there, your, and your. And then for understandability and flow, does it make sense when you read it beginning to end? And then just positive stuff. What was neat, and what would you as a reader like to know more about? The assignment looks like this in the grade book. It's just a form that you complete, and then you hit submit as soon as you've completed that form, and then I will give you your grade, and you'll be solid. I will not give you a grade for this if you have not turned in a rough draft, because I can't prove that you're actually getting someone looking at work. So don't turn in this form before you turn in a rough draft, because it doesn't make sense for someone to review something that does not exist. Rough draft first, and then this assignment, which is a very quick, easy 50-point assignment. It's an easy 50 points. All right, that concludes our writing lesson. Just kind of a quick overview of how to complete that form. We're going to move on to our literature lesson. Our literature lesson for today is reviewing the events of Act 1, Scene 1 so that we can complete the questions that we have in Google Classroom on the form for Act 1, Scene 1. That assignment, just a quick reminder, is under small assignments, and it is a graded assignment. So it is a required assignment to respond to those questions for Act 1, Scene 1. The play itself is based on this poem by Langston Hughes. What Happens to a Dream Deferred? The poem's title is Harlem. It's from a larger collection of poems. The poem itself reads, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over, like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags, like a heavy load. Or does it explode?" So this poem does a lot of things really well. In that first, we're responding to the question, what happens to a dream deferred? We have like kind of a call and response thing going on with a question and an answer. And then we have a series of similes, like a raisin in the sun, like a sore, like rotten meat, like syrupy sweet, like a heavy load. We have all these like similes describing what happens when you put off a dream. Well, this whole story, A Raisin in the Sun, is about a bunch of people whose dreams have effectively been deferred for a lot of different reasons. But suddenly $10,000 enters their lives in the form of an insurance check for Walter and Benita's father, Big Walter, and Mama's husband. And suddenly this family has $10,000 that they didn't have before. They've lost a parent and they've gained some money, and they're trying to decide how they can best spend the money to allow them to pursue those dreams. So let's talk a little bit about the events of A Raisin in the Sun, Act 1, Scene 1, which we watched on Thursday and Friday, and which you need to watch to complete this assignment. In the film, it's the first 35 minutes of the film. So let's do some analysis. This analysis is pulled straight from SparkNotes. I've done a little bit of editing to shorten it, but this is the analysis from SparkNotes. Just FYI, I didn't write this. I won't claim to write this. All of the characters in A Raisin in the Sun have unfulfilled dreams. True. These dreams mostly involve money. Although the younger family seems alienated from white middle-class culture, they harbor the same materialistic dreams as the rest of American society. In the 1950s, the stereotypical American dream was to have a house with a yard, a big car, and a happy family. The Youngers also seem to want to live this dream, though their struggle to attain any semblance of it is dramatically different from the struggle a similar suburban family might encounter, because the Youngers are not a stereotypical middle-class family. Rather, they live in a world in which being middle-class is also a dream. That's like a lot of ways for SparkNotes to dance around the fact that they're a black family who's considering moving into an all-white neighborhood in the 50s, a time where that was a really dangerous thing to do for a lot of folks. I'm going to talk more about that in our literature, in our informational lesson in just a minute. Mama's plant, so now we kind of jump into analysis of the symbols in the scene. Mama's plant symbolizes her version of this dream because she cares for it as she cares for her family. She tries to give the plant enough light and water not only to grow, but also to flourish and become beautiful, just as she attempts to provide for her family with meager yet consistent financial support. Mama also imagines a garden that she can tend along with her dream house. The small potted plant acts as a temporary stand-in for her much larger dream. Her relentless care for the plant represents her protection of her dream. Despite her cramped living situation and her lifetime of hard work that she's endured, she maintains her focus on her dream, which helps her to persevere. Still, no matter how much Mama works, the plant remains feeble because there is so little light. Similarly, it is difficult for her to care for her family as much as she wants and to have her family members grow as much as she wants. Her dream of a house and a better life for her family remains tenuous because it is so hard for her to see beyond her family's present situation. Man, that's skipping over a lot of stuff. Like, why doesn't the plant have light? I don't know. Maybe because it's on a windowsill, like in like the center of a big apartment complex, and there's just not a lot of good light for it to grow. Why is it there? She talks about Big Walter which is her husband who passed. She talks about him struggling to make ends meet, especially after they lost a child, and he took that very personally and, struggled with depression. Like, she goes into detail about how he wanted to move out of the apartment and worked hard to move out of the apartment, but also struggled with, some vices and issues of his own. So I feel like, this is glossing over some of what happened in the scene. Beneatha's dream differs from Mama in that it is in many ways self-serving. In her desires to express herself and to become a doctor, Beneatha proves an early feminist who radically views her role as self-oriented and not family-oriented. That's straight up really good analysis. Like, Beneatha does function well as an early feminist character. Feminism had not fully emerged into the American cultural landscape when Hansberry wrote A Raisin in the Sun, and Beneatha seems a prototype for the more enthusiastic feminism of the 1960s and 1970s. She not only wants to have a career, but also desires to find her identity and pursue an independent career without relying solely on a man. So Beneatha doesn't just want to be a doctor because she's interested in medicine, but because it will make her autonomous, and she won't need a dude to like have a house and have like a life financially, which in the 50s was still kind of a forward-thinking concept. Most women were tied to their husbands financially or struggled on their own financially without a husband. She even indicates to Ruth and Mama that she might not get married, a possibility that astonishes them because it runs counter to their expectations of a woman's role. Similarly, they're befuddled by her dislike of the pretty rich George Murchison. That Beneatha's attitude towards him differs from Ruth's or Mama's may result from the age difference among the three women. Mama and Beneatha are, of course, a whole generation apart, while Ruth occupies a place somewhere in the middle. Hansberry, the author, argues that Beneatha is the least traditional of the women because she is the youngest, which is fair. It's also important to note that Beneatha is the only of the three women who is college educated, so it could also be a commentary on the impact of education on people's aspirations and dreams. Walter and Ruth, who occupy the middle ground in terms of age between Mama and Beneatha, have also tempered their dreams more than Beneatha has. Tempered meaning like deferred or put off or made more realistic. Though Walter and Ruth harbor materialistic dreams, they desire wealth not solely for self-serving purposes, but rather as a means to provide for their family and escape the Southside ghetto in which they live. The tension evoked by issues of money and manhood comes sharply into focus when Travis asks for 50 cents. Ruth, the household manager, refuses to give her son the money. Walter, as a father trying to safeguard his son's ability to be accepted, gives Travis twice as much as he asked for. There's probably a little bit more going on there between like fathers and sons and proving yourself as a provider to your son and like, the relationship between your son and trying to like, show him, that you are strong for him than just safeguarding Travis's ability to be accepted. There's a lot you can read into the scene. It's also important to note, and it doesn't note here, that Walter's dream of owning that liquor store is also kind of similar to Beneatha's goal of being a doctor, and that he wants to work for himself, and he doesn't want to work for a boss, but he wants to be his own boss and not be beholden to somebody else making decisions for him. He works as a chauffeur, so he drives folks around all day long, and he hates that. He wants to work for himself. All right, this assignment is in Google Classroom under Small Assignments. It's called Graded ARITS, A Raisin in the Sun, Act 1, Scene 1. It is due on Saturday. If you're stuck trying to answer the questions in it, you probably will note that in the assignment there are some links. Those links take you to specific parts of the first scene. So, if you're just skimming, if you're just trying to knock that out really quickly, I hate that you're skimming in a really good piece of literature, but at the same time, if you're strapped for time and you need to just kind of go through and get those answers, you can click those links and seek examples of the play that will help you answer those, find those answers quickly. And again, you can find the play itself in primary text readings. There's a PDF also. If you don't want to watch the play, you can use the Control F function on the PDF to kind of find people's names and find quotes pretty quickly that could help you with the answers to this assignment and future A Raisin in the Sun assignments. Cool. Our two graded assignments have passed. Act 1, Seed 1 questions are due Saturday. We just talked about that. And the peer review that I talked about in the writing lesson are also due on Saturday. Okay, so the last piece of this lesson today, I think, is probably the most, intellectually stimulating piece of the lesson. The rest of that was a review and kind of an explanation. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of Louisville and the history of segregation in Louisville. And the lesson here comes from the text, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. So we're going to read a little bit of that. Specifically, we're going to read pages 148 to 151, and then on Thursday and Friday, we're going to look at pages 198 to 200. Short readings is just a 3-page reading, and I have some pictures in here to kind of help you, understand what we're talking about. And what we're talking about in this lesson specifically is the intersection between The Color of Law, A Raisin in the Sun, and Louisville's recent history of segregation. When I say recent, I mean historically recent, like between 1950 and today. So you'll be surprised at how recent some of it is. So here's from The Color of Law. In 1954, Andrew Wade, an African-American electrical contractor and Korean War Navy vet, wanted to purchase a house in the middle-class African-American neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky, but couldn't find anything suitable. A friend and prominent left-wing activist, Carl Braden, this is Carl, this is Andrew and his family. Carl Braden suggested he look at a white middle-class community instead. Braden and his wife, Anne, then agreed to buy a house for Andrew Wade and his wife, Charlotte. The Wades found a property in Shively, an all-white suburb, which the Bradens bought, signing over the deed. So what happened was the Bradens purchased a house in Shively, which at the time in the 50s was an all-white suburb. So they bought a house for the Wade family in Shively, because the Wade family wasn't allowed to buy a house there because of a racial covenant that basically said you can't sell these houses to non-whites. When the Wades and their children were moving in, a crowd gathered in front and a cross was burned on an empty lot next door. On the first evening the family spent at home, a rock crashed through its front window with a message tied to it, "Inward, get out." And later that night 10 rifle shots were fired through the glass of its kitchen door. Under the watch of a police guard, demonstrations continued for a month until the house was dynamited. So you can see images of the house being inspected by an officer on the top left after it was dynamited. The police guard said they saw nothing. There was one arrest following the Wades moving in, of Andrew Wade and a friend for breach of the peace because Mr. Wade had failed to notify the police that a friend would be visiting. So the only person arrested during all of this was Wade, who had moved into the house for inviting a friend over who he hadn't notified the police about. The police chief was familiar enough with the bombers, with the people who threw the bomb, that he warned Carl Braden that the people responsible for blowing up the Wade property were targeting the Braden home next. Although the chief acknowledged that both the dynamiter and the cross-burners had confessed, the perpetrators were not indicted. So the chief at the time acknowledged that we know who did it, they have confessed to throwing the bomb, but we're not going to do anything about it. Instead, a grand jury indicted Carl and Ann Braden, along with 4 others, whom the jury accused of conspiring to stir up racial conflict by selling the house to African Americans. So instead of the people who threw the dynamite being charged with anything, the people who bought the house for the Wade family, Carl and Ann, they were charged with sedition. The formal charge was sedition. Charges against the others were dropped, but Carl Braden was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He eventually won release on appeal, and the Wades went back to Louisville's African American area. Such violence in Kentucky did not end in the 1950s. In 1985, Robert and Martha Marshall bought a home in Sylvania, another suburb of Louisville that had remained exclusively white. Their house was firebombed on the night they moved in. A month later, a second arson attack destroyed the house. A few hours before, a Ku Klux Klan meeting at which a speaker boasted that no African Americans would be permitted to live in Sylvania happened. All right, I got a 404 page not found thing here, not because there's anything wrong with my PowerPoint, but because there are no images if you search for this. None. Like, not on Google, not on Bing. This is just empty. There's just dead space here. There's a Courier Journal article describing exactly what's described here for that time period. And there's a court case that goes through this entire thing. But there are no pictures. And this was in '85, so you know there were cameras. The fact that there are no pictures on the internet about this is super suspicious to me and, like, frankly, fairly terrifying. The Marshall family then sued a county police officer who had been identified as a member of the Klan. The officer testified that about half of the 40 Klan members known to him were also in the police department, and that his superiors condoned officers' Klan membership as long as the information did not become public. So what you can see on the right here is that actual court case with Philip Marshall and Martha Marshall versus Carl Ray Bramer, Billy Wayne Emmons, John Doe, and unknown defendants K1 through K50. K1 through K50 are the people who burned the house down. Many years ago, I read The Wall Between, Anne Braden's memoir that describes how she and her husband were prosecuted by the state of Kentucky for helping Andrew Wade attempt to live in a white neighborhood. I remembered that account when in 2007 the U.S. Supreme Court prohibited that Louisville school district from carrying out a racial integration plan. That's our district. That's JCPS. On the grounds that segregation of Louisville is not a product of state action, but of private choices. So the reason that the Supreme Court argued against a racial integration plan in 2007 for JCPS was the argument that the segregation in Louisville, which is pretty extreme, is a product not of the state, but of private decisions. So the majority opinion was Alito, Kennedy, Roberts, Scalia, and Thomas saying that classifying and assigning school children according to a binary conception of race is an extreme approach. We can't do that. And then the dissenting opinion, which included Ginsburg, Breyer, Souter, and Stevens, said, today's result undermines Brown v. Board of Education's promise of integrated primary and secondary education that local communities have sought to make a reality. State-sponsored violence was a means, along with many others, by which all levels of government maintained segregation in Louisville and elsewhere. The Wades and Marshalls were only two middle-class families confronted with hostile state power when they tried to cross the residential color line. And when they say state power, they're saying because the police did not disclose the names of the people in the LMPD at the time in the 80s who were part of the 40 Klan members who were known but not named. That's the state sanctioning, basically saying it's cool, it's okay for those people to be members of the Klan, to be involved in a firebombing, and to be officers of the law. So because the state sanctioned those actions, it was state-sanctioned segregation. How many other middle-class African Americans in Louisville were intimidated from attempting to live in neighborhoods of their own choosing after hearing of the Wade and Marshall experiences? Did the next generation imbibe a fear of integration from their parents? How long did the memories of such events last? How long did they continue to intimidate? Whew. I hope that was interesting, if not a little bit, disturbing history for you. We're going to read another reading from The Color of Law on Thursday and Friday, another shorter one actually. I hope that this lesson was valuable to you, and I look forward to getting your rough drafts in for essay number 2 with your interviews. The ones that I've been getting in so far have been really cool, and it's neat to read about, the goals that you guys have post high school and, your plans for college and career. I hope you guys have a good one, and thanks for listening.